Hello and welcome to And If Love Remains. I'm your host, Mike Levitt, and I am. This is a very special program. We have again Dr. Elias Pettersson on, and he's going to be co-hosting with me today. Elias is, of course, the founder and artistic director at Southwest Piano Festival. He's also the program and competition coordinator at Arizona Piano Institute. And he's on the piano faculty at Arizona School for the Arts. And we have with us today a fabulous pianist and educator, Professor Daniel Shapiro. He is at the Cleveland Institute of Music. He is recognized as a leading interpreter of Schubert, Mozart, Schumann, Brahms, and Beethoven. And he's been there for 25 years. Is that right, Professor Shapiro?
23.
23 years. Oh, wonderful. That's fabulous. And he has a wonderful reputation as a first-class performer and a first-class teacher and coach, piano coach. And one of the exciting things is right now he is going through the Beethoven Sonata cycle, the 32 piano sonatas that Beethoven wrote. It's actually his third time going through, which is, that's quite a feat just to do it once, but to do it three times, this is amazing. We like to talk about that. But Professor Shapiro, I'd like to ask you just a quick question. One of the things you mentioned in your bio is that you had extensive collaboration with singers, and as a vocalist and pianist myself, I wanted to just ask you how that has influenced your playing and influenced your art with working with singers and that kind of collaboration.
Boy, it's difficult to put into words, but basically, that's, I think, what we all strive to is to make our instrument like the human voice. And I find that there's this immediacy of communication that the human voice is capable of, and the subtlety of expression, whether it's in dynamics or in timing or inflection, is no more so than with the human voice. And so often, I even tell my students, if you sing a particular phrase with as much expressivity as you can, regardless of how good your voice is or isn't, and then listen to how you sing it, and then try and make the piano sound like the way your voice did, and that's already quite a challenge. So that's one aspect of it is all just this directness of communication, and also, of course, the composers were at their most inspired when they were writing for the human voice. And a lot of the themes that come up in Lieder, for example, nature and things, and then of course love, those tend to get not only into their song literature but into the everything else. And so it's just a touchstone in so many different ways, and also learning how to breathe and what breathing is all about. Watching singers breathe is essential. And some years ago, 6-7 years ago, I started listening to Metropolitan Opera Radio on Sirius XM, and they play broadcasts of great opera performances going back 60, 70 years. And just getting heavy doses of hearing, Leonard Warren, Leontine Price, and people like this, it just in some way has affected and enriched my playing. In addition to, of course, the work that I've done on my own with singers.
So, Dr. Lees, why don't you go ahead and get us kind of ramped up talking about a little bit less about voice, a little more about piano and Beethoven.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'm very curious, Professor Shapiro, that you're doing this entire cycle again in many concerts, of course, many recitals. So I have a few questions based on that, and of course, you can take them one at a time or as you like. But when presenting the entirety of Beethoven's 32 sonatas, one thing is, how do you group them? How do you choose to group the sonatas together? And what parameters do you use? And of course, I don't know the other two iterations that you did of these cycles, but did you do them in the same order, or do you change that as you've, obviously grown and become more and more familiar with these sonatas? So I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, each time has been a different order. And each time I do it, and this is no exception, it's sort of like, kind of like a logic puzzle. I have these certain parameters, and then once I fill those in, then I start to figure out, okay, if I put this sonata here, then I can't put that sonata there, and so forth. And so the parameters essentially are, I decide which ones I want to end with. And then I want, usually, although not exclusively, to avoid having back-to-back sonatas of the same key, although in the next one coming up, there will be two of the same key, but there will be an intermission in between. So,
Okay.
But in this time around, what I wanted to do was keep all of the sonatas of a given opus together and also have the last three sonatas together. I hadn't done that before. So the first concert had all of the opus 2s, and the second concert had all of the opus 31, then the next one will have all of the opus 10s, and so on. And the last concert, the eighth concert, will have the last three sonatas, as I said. And then the one before that will have the Hammerklavier. And this is, and then I start to also figure out which would be good openers, and then just try and sort out the rest so that there would be balance, no program too short, no program too long, that kind of thing. So it's just kind of a juggling act.
Yeah, there must be a lot of logistics to think about, and certainly the Hammerklavier. Is that going to be in its own recital, or are you going to pair it with a shorter, like Opus 78?
It'll be paired with the two Opus 14s, so two of the shorter ones.
Oh, perfect. And we're looking forward to that. Actually, I chimed into the last recital you had with the Opus 31s with Tempest in there, and looking forward to the next one as well. I have another big question, and of course, Mike, you can chime in with some things too. What are some of the challenges of playing Beethoven? I know a lot of our listeners, or Mike's listeners for And If Love Remains, many are musicians, many are not musicians, and if you could describe what are the challenges, not just technically, but also musically, and maybe his sonatas compared to some of his other works for piano. Although I tend to find all the things are in his sonatas, all of his compositional style and technical demands are there. But I don't know if you could just talk a little bit through some of those issues and what you find particularly from your experience.
Oh boy. You want me to go first, or do you want to go first, Mike, or how should we do this?
No, go ahead. Okay. I'd love to hear your input on that. Okay.
The challenges are many. There are, intellectual and emotional. There's the challenge of just, understanding at a deep emotional level, what is he trying to say? What is, a given sonata trying to express? And that involves both, the emotions and the intellect. And there is understanding of how everything fits together. He's really a musical architect. And to figure out structurally, architecturally, how all the pieces fit together. And it's one thing, if you look at a lot of analyses in textbooks of Beethoven Sonata, you'll read things like, well, first comes this theme for 4 bars, and then comes this for 8 bars, and then you have this for 10 bars or whatever. And then we go to this harmony, and then we go to that harmony. That's all well and good, but that's in a way just the starting point, because that doesn't really tell you how it all fits together and how it ticks. So to figure out the inner drama of the material, of what's really happening in terms of the drama of the material, that takes some thought and some figuring out. And it takes time, it takes living and visiting the sonatas and putting them back and revisiting them and so forth.
I was going to ask you, how does that, I mean, with this being your third time through, how has that influenced, like how has that changed over time? Or has much at all?
Hopefully, they have ripened and deepened because I've, experienced life much more in between these. Since the last cycle, I've now have 3 kids, now ages 18, 15, and 10. And so just going through all of that is, living life and all of the joys and tribulations of raising kids. And I would like to think that somewhere that makes their way into how I play them or how I look at them in some way. It hopefully enriches the experience in some way that I can't necessarily pinpoint. It's just subconscious. It's there somehow.
Right. It kind of gets me to a question about your relationship with Beethoven as a composer. Elias and I have discussed, for example, we were talking the other day about how I have kind of I'm a latecomer to Brahms. I didn't love him at first, but he grew on me. And I'm wondering, with Beethoven for you, was he a love at first sight for you, or was he one that you had to kind of grow to appreciate and love?
No, I guess because I started playing the first Beethoven sonata probably when I was 9 or 10 years old. So it was just always there. It wasn't an issue of sort of coming around to him. Debussy is a composer that recently I'm starting to figure out more. I don't want to say for sure I've figured him out, but more than in the past. But Beethoven, I've just sort of, he's always been there. And I think that doesn't mean that I fully understood him when I was 9, but
Right.
I've always just been with that repertoire and studying with teachers from the so-called Schnabel school, the Schnabel tradition, which emphasized this repertoire along with, Mozart, Schubert, and so forth. So it's just always been a part of my life.
I had a question. I don't know if I can jump in here. My experience too, I've only played or performed about 8 or 9 of Beethoven sonatas. And for me, that's already a lot to take in. And usually each one is in a separate program. I've never really performed multiple sonatas in a program. But do you find that his sonatas are what pianists might call pianistic? And what I mean by that is we sort of are in a school now, a piano school, handed down to us from, let's say, Chopin and Liszt, where things might fit a certain way. The piano has not developed so much since Liszt's time, the last 150, 60 years. But in Beethoven's time, the piano was quite different, and maybe the demands for the keyboardists were different as well. So I'm just curious, when you play these sonatas today, for pianists out there, do you find them pianistic? Do you find them not so pianistic? What are some of the ways that you might adjust your playing style to suit them?
It's a very good question and not easy to answer. Because pianistic, I think, has different connotations for different people. And for me, I guess, when I think of something as being pianistic, it means that there's just something about the physical act of playing the notes that feels natural, and that's almost the physical act of playing the notes is almost what the music is all about, in a sense, for some Chopin and Liszt and so forth. And so there is some of that in Beethoven, especially earlier Beethoven, but in that sense, not so much. But if you think of pianistic as, using the resources of the piano, then of course Beethoven is very pianistic, but almost paradoxically think, because he is always turning the piano. He uses the resources of the piano to turn the piano into not a piano. He's always turning the piano
An
into
orchestra
an orchestra or a string quartet or something like that, usually an orchestra.
Right.
And now, also, I have to say, there are a lot of awkward things. I mean, the fugue of the Hammerklavier is very awkward and far from the pianism of Chopin or Liszt. I mean, as difficult as Chopin or Liszt can be, it's born of the hand of the pianist, or the hand and arm of the pianist, as a point of departure. And Beethoven simply wrote the tones that he wanted, and to carry over to the piano, what he learned.
Figure it out from there.
Yeah, and good luck.
To help. Do you think I care? To hell with you. Think I care about your damned instrument when the spirit moves me? What he said.
Right.
So in that sense, I guess you could say it's not pianistic, but certainly in the early sonatas, you have a lot of pianistic figurations, and there are a lot of uniquely pianistic sounds and things like the Waldstein sonata and so forth. So I guess it's kind of a mixed answer.
Yeah, that's a good answer. It's tough to say. And my follow-up for that, and again, this is, you could have many answers to this, and I don't know if it's too simplistic to ask, but is there a sonata, I know Mike wants to ask about your favorite,
no,
but
go
is
ahead.
there a sonata that you find the most difficult or most challenging, and in what way? Or maybe there are different challenges, so one sonata might be more challenging in this way and another in this way. But what are some? Certainly, Hammerklavier is going to be up there in one of those aspects. What, if you could speak to the technical challenges of different sonatas, or what you find in them?
I would say the two most difficult are probably the Hammerklavier and Opus 101.
Okay.
The Hammerklavier is just, unquestionably, it's a bear. It's over 40 minutes long. It's very thick writing for the piano, very contrapuntal. The fugue, is after you've been playing for 30 minutes and you're already tired, and you have to play this fugue. And not only that, but the last part of the fugue is the most difficult. So when you're really tired, you have to play the most difficult part of it. Also the technical. I mean, just there are all kinds of really technically difficult things about the Hammerklavier. And then, of course, there's the architectural issues and making sense of it all. And there's this incredibly profound slow movement of about 19 minutes. But having said all of that, there's something about Opus 101. 101 is somehow a bit more elusive, and is the word I would like to use. It's hard to grasp it at any given moment. One can try to, quote, figure it out and try to, quote, understand it, but to really convey its essence at any given moment is very difficult. So that's why it's definitely up there.
Very fascinating, yeah.
This is Mike Levitt. I'm with And If Love Remains, and we're speaking. I'm kind of experimenting for the first time with Elias here co-hosting, and very excited for that. But we're here with Professor Daniel Shapiro of the Cleveland Institute, who is in the midst of performing the Beethoven Sonata cycle, which is 32 sonatas, two questions, just by way of reference. If people want to listen to your next performance, how would they do that? And where and why did you decide to do that, especially in the midst of the pandemic? I don't know if you planned on doing this for the 250th anniversary. Like, talk us through those things. But first of all, how would somebody come to listen to it when your next performance is?
The next one is done through this organization called Piano Cleveland, which hosts and runs the Cleveland International Piano Competition. I think it's pianocleveland.org, but I'm sure if you Google Piano Cleveland, you can find their website. And it's through them that they'll be live streaming the concert, which is at 8 p.m. Eastern, a week from today. Haha, boy, that's
Right on, and we we'll put links in the show notes for people to follow, because I know there will be people that will really enjoy listening to this after hearing this show. But again, was this something that you planned on doing because of the anniversary or is
Yes.
this okay? So there was something you planned on doing, and how did things change, and what was the decision process and actually going through with the performance and how you performed it when the pandemic hit?
Yeah, basically, obviously, I was not expecting to
Right.
do the cycle with the pandemic coming along, but I wanted to do it because of the Beethoven anniversary year, and it seemed about time to to have another go at this cycle. So that all kind of came together, and yeah, that's pretty much.
And you're doing it online. It seems you're doing it in as close to a performance setting as you can. I've seen other online concerts where it feels more like a studio setting, and things like that. This is a bit more formal, which I appreciate you going to that, especially. But is that what you were trying to accomplish?
Yeah, I mean, because I wanted, obviously, I was originally hoping to be live recitals, and I
Right.
much prefer playing for live recital situations than for a microphone in an empty hall. But yeah, that is what it is, and but I like to come as close to experiencing the sense of a live recital as possible.
Wonderful. One more quick question, and then I think Elias has another question for you. We talked about some of the more difficult ones for you to perform. Just as a point of curiosity, do you have a favorite one that you like to perform that you just really look forward to? And do you have a favorite one that may be different that you enjoy listening to?
Oh boy, let me think. I have a few that I especially like, and I guess it's probably the nature of if in most cases like this, if you ask people, it'll not be the usual ones.
Right.
If you ask an artist what their favorite painter is, they won't necessarily jump to Rembrandt or Michelangelo. So it's kind of the nature of the beast. So yeah, maybe some of my ones are some of the ones that I want to champion that are a bit but Opus 90 I especially enjoy playing. And Opus 78 also, which is
I love that
that's coming up in the one after this one on December 13th. Although the second movement is really tricky. But
yes.
I love
That's
Opus
a hard
78.
second movement, but it's so beautiful.
Yeah. And there are certain movements that I especially love. The slow movements of the. I love playing slow movements. I guess I love the slow movement of the Harmoniclavier, the slow movement of 31-1. The slow movement of 22. Those are some of my favorite. And 22 is one of my favorite ones also, although the first movement is just a bear to play, at least for me. But it was one of Beethoven's favorites, and there's this kind of this contentment and this euphoric feeling about the whole thing that is quite wonderful.
Fabulous.
That's awesome to hear. Yeah, it's funny to hear some of those. I wouldn't have thought of 22. 78 I can totally see as just a joy to play. I haven't performed that one myself, but it's so beautiful to open with. But yeah, I had a question on, Beethoven was such a meticulous composer and sort of fastidious and all of his markings. And if we think of comparing him just to a generation or two previously, we don't get all those markings. We don't have all those characteristic things that made Beethoven so famous, like the subito piano or whatever. But I was just curious how you both perform some of his works and even how you teach a lot of it, because he's so particular, and yet there are so many versions of Beethoven's sonata cycle out there with so many different interpretations. Of course, I know you come from quite the famous Schnabel tradition, and of course we've all heard his performances. Many of us have his editions and his notes and fingering and all that. But how do you square those issues with so many different interpretations, and I'm sure your interpretations have grown with Beethoven's really careful and specific markings?
Mike, do you want to have a go? Or do you want me to start? Or
I think, well, I think it's a very good question. As far as like how, I have not performed any of the sonatas in a concert, and so I am not one to speak to it directly. But I am curious about what your intentions, like that balance. It's interesting. Elias and I have talked about this a lot, like the balance that we have between the artist and the listener and the composer. In other words, you have your interpretation that you're trying to share with the audience. An audience has a certain expectation to hear a certain thing, and then the composer has written a certain thing that he expected to be played, which may or may not all be the same thing. And along the same lines, I'm curious, like how do you square those circles there?
maybe what I would say is, and this is also something I tell students and myself. Yes, there are a lot of recordings out there, and a lot of them have, I guess, shaped what the public expects to hear. And there are a lot of recordings by great, wonderful artists, Dr. Schnabel and so forth. But yet, when we study each of these pieces, we have to put all of that aside. I always tell my students not to listen to any recording of any piece that they start studying, but to just study from the score itself. And not until they performed it once, say in a studio class or a recital, where then you can go and see what Mr. Schnabel does, or what Mr. Serkin or Edwin Fischer or whoever, Annie Fisher, whoever it might be. And then I think also, kind of in that regard, we have to find our way with these pieces and do what Beethoven asks of us, regardless of whether that's the way it's often done. And in the majority of cases, interpreters haven't gone far off and do credible. But sometimes you find things that almost nobody does right. And so if that's fine. If you think nobody else has done it right, then you do it right, or I'll do it, whatever. So all we can do is study this music and follow his instructions and ask what they mean. It's one thing to just obey them, but you have to ask why they're there and exactly. Many. What if he writes forte? What does that mean? It doesn't just mean play loud.
Right.
And so you have to do a lot of thinking about what every marking means and also why it's there. And of course, the later you go in Beethoven, the more specific he gets. There's much more detailed as markings of the late sonatas than the very earliest ones. But yeah, I think one has to study this music very carefully and come up with one's conception of the music, and then you go with it. And
But your feeling is it should come from the score first. That's the the Bible, if you will. That you need to come up with your own interpretation, your own idea before being influenced by other people's performance.
Yes. Yeah. I suppose theoretically you could say that's not entirely possible, but we do the best we can, and we have.
But there's a difference between listening to something with the intent of just happenstance listening to it, and listening to something with the intent of I'm going to be performing this, and I want to I want to hear how somebody else is doing it for that purpose. That seems to be two different types of listening.
Right. Yeah. There are actually many ways one can listen to something, I suppose. But one shouldn't listen for, well, Mr. X does this, and I'm going to borrow that particular thing. Although, this is not like copyrightable material. If I do something, a phrasing that Schnabel does, I don't have to worry about his estate suing me.
Right.
It's like in the scientific literature, it's public knowledge. And if I realize I was mistaken by something that I did, and the phrasing or whatever that Mr. Schnabel does is better, then fine. I've learned my lesson, and I'll do it that way. But hopefully, I'm making a conscious decision based on what I've studied, and so on.
Well, and again, as Elias mentioned, with many in our audience, they're not professional musicians, but they're learning, and they've actually had a lot of listeners. Which one of the things I'm most proud of. I had a lot of listeners that have through our conversations with Elias, talking about some of the music that he's performed, has come to grow to love some of this great music. And I'm wondering why, to a modern audience, are these pieces important? Why? And this is kind of a big question. I understand, like one of those bottomless questions. But I'm curious, just your thoughts on why are they? What do they mean today? And why should somebody invest the time to listen to these sonatas?
Elias, you want to go?
We're interested in hearing your thoughts. maybe I'll jump in here and there, but no, I'm very curious to hear what you think.
I don't know if I have anything remarkably revelatory to say, but I would because lately I think there has been in some circles some challenge to the validity of playing Beethoven or the greatness of Beethoven. But I firmly do believe that, first of all, we know that Beethoven thought in terms of humanity as a whole and humanity of the future, and that he kind of almost preaching his own gospel, if you will, to humanity at large. And so the message of Beethoven, and the sense of ethics, the sense of philosophical ideas and overcoming and all that kind of thing, I think is as resonant and important today, especially today with everything that's been going on, as it ever was. And that Beethoven music continues to inspire us and to make it not only move us, but to somehow, when you hear a great performance of a Beethoven sonata, like when I hear a Schnabel performance of Beethoven sonata, one feels more aware of, I don't know, the space-time continuum and everything. And
right.
One feels wiser and better as a person. And Beethoven has, even made remarks kind of in that direction. So I think it's all the more reason why we can and should champion this music and proclaim it, and audiences can be still moved and inspired by it.
Mm-hmm. I have a little bit of a follow-up, because you got me thinking when you mentioned a little earlier that each time you've come back to these cycles, your life has changed and grown, and therefore your interpretations might have changed and grown. And I think in my experience, playing something like Beethoven sonata or works by Brahms or even Chopin, the really great masterworks, each time I come back, I find something new in them. So I think there are other pieces that I've performed in the past, even very good pieces, and I won't necessarily mention them, but because I think they're very effective, they're very accessible. But when I've had to bring them back for concerts, I don't find that, I find, not to be egotistical about it, but like I already figured out what needs to be said for that piece. I don't think there was anything deeper that I was missing the first time or second time around. But with Beethoven or Brahms, I always feel that there's something that even if I studied it very well and recorded it and all that, there's still something that I can find in it and discover for myself. So I think you find that from what you've said before, but is that kind of your feeling with Beethoven sonatas?
Absolutely. And the famous Schnabel phrase, these are pieces of music that are better than can be played.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost, the nature of a great work of art is that it is endless and unpindownable and endlessly growing and living organism. Mm-hmm. And and it's funny. We study a piece really carefully and intensely and all that, and we think we've done a great job, and then we come back a year or two later, and we slap our forehead and we say, "How did I miss such an easy? How stupid could I be?" That kind of thing. So it really is fascinating. Sometimes, sometimes even the most simple things can escape us.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting too. Sorry to jump in, but you mentioned before about the traditions of a certain piece, and let's say X number of people have performed Appassionata, which is such a famous sonata, and there are certain ways to perform it that's just sort of tradition. And of course, it's hard to get away from ever hearing that piece when you start it, because we've heard so many performances and recordings of it. And I often find myself, if I perform or play a piece, going back to a recording and then hearing somebody do something new, like, oh, I kind of like that. Maybe I will incorporate it, maybe I won't. But to put you a little bit on the spot, do you find any particular places in Beethoven sonatas where the tradition, or at least the mainstream tradition, is not correct, or just it's kind of been convoluted over the years, and we've lost the thread, we've lost the essence of that passage? And I don't know if you have a particular one in mind, or many, or would have to search for those things, but I'd just be curious if there are places like that.
For me, what jumps to mind first are the second movements of 31-3 and 54. I think both of those are played too fast. 31-3, the second movement, I think Schnabel plays much too fast. It's wonderful to listen to anyway, but so sometimes there are certain tempi of certain pieces that I think people get wrong. Let's see if I can.
I mean, I know there are certain instances where a note could be different from one edition to another, and I think there's something in the 101.
I should mention actually that this time around I have the advantage of the new Barenreiter Jonathan Delmar Beethoven editions, which has all kinds of sometimes astonishing new things in it. And so even though every single recording has certain notes, I have to realize that's not what Beethoven wanted. But that's no fault of any of the interpreters. They just didn't have those resources available to them.
Do you have any examples in mind? I think there's something in 101 from my recollection, but I can't remember now.
Actually, in this concert upcoming, there's a couple of things in the last movement of Opus 27, number 1. Let's see. I'm at the piano. C natural instead of C flat. I have to hopefully remember to do that when I play it. There's one actually in Opus 90, which I'm ashamed to say I totally forgot to do because I'm so used to it the other way. But in the recapitulation of Opus 90, he wrote... with that G sharp in the bass.
Wow. Yeah, I'm not used to hearing that. Wow.
Yeah,
that's cool.
Okay.
And I so wanted to do that when I played it in the first concert, and I forgot. I'm duly embarrassed.
Is that in that Barenreiter edition? Because I haven't seen that in any of the notes, even in the various Henley editions that have come out.
I think it's new to Barenreiter. Yeah, and the thing I mentioned in 27.2 and another little thing is also a first in this edition.
Okay, and where did they draw that from? Do you know?
Jonathan Delmar went back to the sources, back to the autographs, every possible source, and did an absolute thorough job of really rediscovering everything. And he discovered things, if you look in the there are 4 volumes. The sonata takes up 3 volumes, and then the critical commentary takes up the 4th volume. And very often you'll see the phrase "most modern editions." Most modern editions have this, which is not correct, because they took it from the first edition, which was obviously an error or something, where there was this new source that's been undiscovered, things like that.
That's awesome. I mean, I have about 6 editions myself of Beethoven sonatas, but maybe this will be one to add to it.
Yeah,
So
Yeah.
I'm fascinated. Yeah, I know. Yeah. Wow, that's so cool.
That really is. That's really. I'm very excited to hear the upcoming stuff. Now that's very cool.
Well, I should mention, I think the introduction to Opus 111, I feel, is often played too slowly. It's marked maestoso. It's not marked grave or grave maestoso or anything like that. And I mean, it shouldn't be fast, but it doesn't have to be. It should be close to 2-1, I think, to the ensuing allegro.
Okay. What do you think of some of his tempo markings, which seem in some cases unreasonably fast for our ears today?
You're talking about metronome markings, I guess.
Metronome. Sorry. Yes. Yeah. Metronome markings.
That's a very good question, and one could have hours of debate about this. Fortunately for fortunately, there's only one sonata where he wrote metronome markings, the famous controversial markings of the Hammerklavier.
Right, which is
and
very
those
fast.
are just impossible.
Well, and I've had Wim Winter on, who's is a champion of the old the one step metronome markings that we misinterpret a lot of those metronome markings.
You mean as being double what they're supposed to be?
Yes.
Yeah, I have trouble swallowing that, I have to say. Maybe I have to read up more about that. Mm-hmm. But I just can't get behind, doing things like
that. Right.
But maybe I'll learn and then realize otherwise. But I find that if you look at his words, how he uses allegro and how he uses and when and how he uses allegro con brio and so forth, there's a certain consistency and a certain almost a system to how he uses these tempo markings. And not to go quite as far as Rudolf Kolisch, but you can find, a similarity of tempo among his allegro con brios and so on and so forth. And, and then you get to kind of a fundamental dichotomy when you have something like the Pastoral Symphony, the first movement, which he marks allegro ma non troppo. And yet, if you play the metronome marking he gives, in my opinion, it simply does not sound allegro ma non troppo. If you play that metronome marking and ask any person what the tempo marking would be, if they heard it at that tempo marking, they would say allegro con brio, allegro vivace, whatever. Simply does not sound. So do you go with the words or do you go with the metronome markings? Mm-hmm. And I've kind of come down on the side of the words.
That's cool. Yeah.
That's it. That's interesting. That's what as you immerse yourself in these sonatas, it's like getting yourself into a book series where you just you can go deeper and deeper and deeper. I'm curious about what Beethoven has brought to his innovations that he's brought to the sonata form. The things that were innovative, that his vision for the piano. I think that his vision for the piano is actually quite bigger than what the piano, at least in his time, could produce. Yes. So I'm curious about what do you think his vision for these pieces and how that vision kind of moved into other composers as we move into later romantic stuff.
What I would say is that, yes, there are all these revolutionary things and different experimental things and so forth that he did with the form and whatnot and the sound. But if I were to pinpoint the fundamental step that he took that was then later developed, was that I think consistently he was really the first one to make a whole sonata as one entity, one artistic statement, one philosophical statement. So not three movements or four movements. Contrasted as they may be, they somehow all tie together in some way. Not in every piece, of course, but the later you go, the more consistently so. So that something like Opus 110 or Opus 90, whatever it might be, Appassionata, you have the feeling of the totality of one artistic testament, one statement as a whole. And I think that's what Brahms did with the symphonies and Schumann and so on and so forth.
Just to be a little bit of a devil's advocate, how would you contrast that to a sonata by Mozart, even a late one? I'm thinking of like the B flat or even the 576 D major. Do you think those are more individualized movements, not as cohesive, or?
No, I think in Mozart you do find some of this beginning to happen, and maybe the late symphonies. But I think, I guess Mozart was starting to move in that direction.
But maybe not quite to the degree of the singular vision of Beethoven.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Yeah, and I guess Haydn too. I mean, he has the humor, but I can see that there are things that are separate, and maybe only in the really late ones do you get a full work. And I think even in Beethoven's time, it wasn't necessarily customary to play an entire sonata together, correct? And certainly not multiple sonatas in a recital.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you find performing? I mean, I'm sure you've played many recitals in your life where you had a Beethoven sonata in them, amongst many other pieces. How do you find that's different than playing a recital solely of Beethoven sonatas?
I don't know.
That's a good answer.
I just play what I have to play, and I guess there is a bigger shifting of gears. I mean, there's huge shifting of gears in amongst sonatas of Beethoven. But if I have to go from Beethoven then to Schumann, that's a whole clean slate. So I guess there's even bigger shifting of gears.
Yeah. Oh, cool.
This is my name is Mike Levitt. I'm with And If Love Remains. We're talking with Daniel Shapiro, professor at Cleveland Institute of Music, and Dr. Pettersson. And it's been such a wonderful time with you. Professor Shapiro is going through the Beethoven cycle, and we'll have links to his performances in the show notes. Elias, what anything else you want to wrap up with, or any other final thoughts you have?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. He's Mr. Shapiro. You've really talked about so many different aspects of playing these sonatas and how they fit into Beethoven as a whole, and how we should listen to them today as musicians, as pianists, as non-musicians. It's really wonderful to hear all your thoughts. So I just really
it's been a wonderful experience for me too.
Yeah, I want to thank you for coming on, and
it's been a pleasure to talk about this stuff.
Yeah,
I could talk all night.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And we should do it again, as I would really, really enjoy that. Maybe as we get closer to after a few performances, we can do it again. It'd be a joy.
You're going to do, I think, one recital per month. Is that correct?
Yes, that's the plan. Yes.
And so do you have the third one, and you have a total of 8 or 9? I can't remember.
8.
Okay. So 8 recitals. So maybe after you've completed the cycle, we could have you back on and talk about your experience in doing that whole cycle again.
Yeah, whatever. I'm happy to do this, whatever you wish.
Oh, awesome. Fabulous. Fabulous. Well, thank you, Professor Shapiro. Is there anything you'd like to add or share with us before or anything I forgot to let our listeners know about you? And
no, I mean, maybe I was thinking I meant to mention this before, so maybe it might be good to add this. Just as what I was saying about the performer not relying on the traditions, to come up with this interpretation. I think as an audience member, as a listener, I hope what the listener will do is pretend they've never heard this piece before.
Thank you.
Because I, as a performer, also try to have the feeling when I step on the stage that I am, in a sense, turning into Beethoven, and that this music is being created for the first time. It's like a world premiere. So one has to imagine every performance of every Beethoven sonata as a kind of world premiere. And hopefully that might be a good way for us to try to listen to a piece like this that we've all heard.
I sincerely appreciate you saying that, because I think it's important that especially those people who may feel maybe a bit intimidated about approaching this music. I think if you think of it as a world premiere, if you think about this is something brand new and something exciting, and as it will be, I mean, there's no doubt it will be exciting and it will be a lot of fun. I think it's a great way to approach this, and as a musician to try to think of it as a clean slate, to do the best you can to do that is a good yoga technique, if you will.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
So we really sincerely appreciate you being on the show. This has been a lot of fun. Let's do this again. And you can find linked in the show notes links to his performances. I hope you'll check it out and make good comments. And we look forward to doing this again. Thank you very much, Professor Shapiro and Dr. Pettersson.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Hope to see you in the flesh sometime soon.
Looking forward to that for sure. This is And If Love Remains.